Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Sharice Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Sharice Walker, and today I'm here with Francesca Amante, and she is an accomplished, very, very accomplished in many different things, and has an amazing story. And so I would love, if you have struggled or if you feel like you have to measure up to somebody, or you have, there's this purpose where you have to please somebody else, listen to this podcast because Francesca has been there. So Francesca, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Thank you so much, Sharice, for having me on your incredible podcast. I feel very honored to be here. To all of you that may not know me in the audience, my name is Francesca Amante. I am a public speaker. I am an author of a children's book. I also coach and just feel so grateful to get to work with so many incredible women every single day. And I feel so aligned with Sharice and what you're doing and how you inspire people each and every day in the work that you do and through this podcast platform. So my goal today is just to be able to share a little bit of my journey and hoping that maybe there's one person in the audience that needs to hear this today.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. So why don't we get started by you kind of telling your background, because it's very unique. I don't think many people could probably say that the same thing happened to them. So from childhood, what happened?
Absolutely, Sharice. So a little bit bringing back, my mom and dad had my brother and sister, and it would have been around the age of 16, 17 when my brother was killed in a tragic car accident. And my sister was about 14 at the time. So for me personally, I was born several years later. I think like any grieving mom and dad at the time, they were just trying to figure out how to get up in the morning and how to carry on with life, when the way that my mom described it ever so eloquently is just that, she couldn't understand how everyone else, just the day after Frank died, it was just like everyone picked up and moved on, and it was like nothing happened. And she's like, how can I carry on when my whole world will never, ever, ever be the same? And so I think their doctor at the time had suggested, maybe have another child, see if that kind of brings you another purpose of getting up every day. And so in the midst of their journey for 5 years, trying to have another child, I think they kind of got to the point where they kind of almost gave up. And I think it's kind of when they relaxed almost, and that's when they had me. So I was born 5 years later. They gave me the female version of my brother's name. So his full name was Francesco. My name is Francesca. And from a very young age, it's not like I really knew what was going on. My sister was already married and out of the house. And I think when I was about 4 or 5, Sharice, I remember my mom and dad were always just very, very sad. It was always a very, you could just tell there was grief in the home, even though from a young age, I didn't really know what grief was. But when I was about 5 or 6, I ended up asking my mom this one day, why are you and dad always sad? And, she kind of just sat down beside me and shared with me. She's like, you used to have a brother, and this is how he passed away. And then we had you, and, you're bringing so much sunshine into our lives. And I think like any mom can or does, they try to sum that up in somewhat of a positive way. And I think my mom did a lovely job with the tools that she had at the time. And I don't really know how many parents can even share that with a young child. I think she did a lovely job, but I know that for me, even though it was never pronounced to me, I always felt as though I was born to fill a void. I felt like I was like, well, how am I supposed to now fill this void of this person that everybody talks about, that they loved him. He was one of those people that walked into a room and just lit it up with his smile. He was funny. He had this beautiful personality. And I remember thinking at a young age, I'm like, how am I ever going to live up to this? And what's funny, Sharice, is that for a very, very long time, I had this fear that if I did not live up to, this void that I was supposed to fill or live up to my brother, I was scared that they were going to give me away, which is so crazy to think now. But I remember when I was like 6 or 7, this one day they were really, really sad. And I grew up in competitive figure skating and dance, and I had all these different costumes. So I was doing changing into different costumes and putting on music and doing these little dances because I was like, I need to make them smile. I need to take away this pain. And I remember so distinctly in that moment, there was one day in particular where it was like, it wasn't working. It was just, and we know how it is with grief. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. There's no quick fix. But as a young girl, I didn't know any better.
Mhm.
And I remember going back into my room and I was like, oh my gosh, that didn't work. Like, are they going to get rid of me? Are they going to say to me, oh my gosh, Francesca, we're so sorry, but like you're not filling this gap the way that we expected you to. I don't know what I thought, Charisse, but that really hung over my head for a long time. And then in addition to that, kind of with the sports, my mom and dad put me in competitive figure skating, dance, like ballet, tap, jazz, lyrical, all the things, piano, swimming. And I think they kind of anticipated that I would be good at one or I would take to one of them and then they could pull me out of the rest. But um, unfortunately, I think for me, that was one of my avenues in terms of me trying to figure out a way that I could show them that like I am worthy to be here. Like I am going to be so good at every sport. And I worked my butt off at every single sport that they put me into, and even piano and swimming. To the point where they kept me in every single sport, sure, just because I think they were like, well, she's really good at them. She works very hard. She doesn't waste any time at those sports. She gets there and she's so focused. But I also recognize as an adult that, like, yes, I worked really hard and yes, I put my heart and soul into all of those avenues, but it wasn't necessarily because it brought me joy. It was my internal fear of if I don't show up and be the absolute best I can be and win that gold medal, again, am I worthy enough to be here to fill this void, to be in the place of this human being that has now passed? And as we all know, anytime someone passes, there's this almost like angelic energy around them in terms of like Elvis Presley. No one will ever be Elvis
Right.
Presley because he was so special in who he was, right? So
Totally.
that's kind of going back a little bit, Charisse, in terms of my childhood.
Mhm.
There's so much more to share, but I hope that kind of clarifies maybe for the audience a bit of like where it all started and where some of that mentality kind of came about in terms of me trying to figure out who I was in the midst of it in the process of trying to please everyone else around me.
Okay, so we're gonna have to unpack. I gotta take the glasses off for this because um I want to go back in just a second, but I want to ask you, at what point did you realize that you were doing this to try to please your parents and to try to, fill this void? When did you realize that?
Sadly, but interestingly enough, it wasn't until I was 19 years old, Cherise. So I was a youth leader for many years. And I guess maybe like 4 or 5 years into being a youth leader, we were at this particular conference and I was leading all these youth. They were maybe like, I don't know, anywhere from 14 to 17 years old. I was a bit of an old soul. So at 19, I kind of was a little bit more on the mature side. But I remember we all went to this one particular conference. The speaker was on stage and back then I didn't cry very much, I think just because I knew that I needed to be strong all the time.
Yeah.
And so the speaker was speaking and something hit me, Cherise. I just started to cry. And all these youth that had known me for a couple of years that maybe knew a bit of my story, but not a whole lot. This one young girl, her name's Becca. I'm still friends with her till this day, but she was maybe 16 at the time. She walked up to me and she was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what hit me, but that speaker said something and something just came over and I didn't know what it was that made me cry. And she just looked at me and she like just dead in the eyes, she says to me, she's like, maybe somewhere up there, something is trying to tell you that you don't need to be Francesco and Francesca, but being you is enough. And I just was like, what did you just say? Like, I was just so blown away. No one had ever said that to me in my life. It's not that anyone had ever told me that I needed to be my brother or I needed to be, enough for him and for me, or I don't know. It's just when she said those words, I was just blown away. So it was in that moment that something kind of shattered for me. I got back to the Okanagan where I lived and I went to my mom and dad and I was like, I had this epiphany while I was away at this conference. I'm like, that I don't need to be enough for him and for like I just need to be me and me being me is enough. Like, and they were of course looking at me like it was almost like this, like, of course, like why would you think any differently? But my whole life up until I was 19, like that was not a norm for me. It wasn't, me being me wasn't enough in that moment. I did everything from the religion that my mom and dad were in or that my mom was in. after my brother's passing, I followed that religion because I knew that I needed to please her. I did so much in my sports, in my, just even school life, everything that I chose, I wasn't doing it for me. I didn't ever have the belief system that being me was enough. Like that was never even an option. And so I guess for me, Charisse, like it was in that moment that, yeah, that was shattered. And I pretty much looked at my mom and dad and I was like, it's not like I'm changing everything, but
Right.
there are so many things that I'm not going to be doing anymore because I'm not doing them for me. I actually stepped away from the particular religious group that they were in, and my mom, oddly enough, did. She left with me. There were just a couple things that were not aligning. Didn't feel right in my heart. And then as time progressed, there were just certain things that if it didn't align with me, I decided to make a different choice. And slowly but surely, I started really aligning with what really brought me joy and true happiness. And it wasn't so much about pleasing everyone around me. So I would say that would be the moment, Charisse, where my world changed for the better.
So did you continue figure skating then, or did you, step back? Were you doing it for you, or were you doing it because of your parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started where I was doing everything for them. And I think for that knowing of if I can externalize all of these behaviors, I will know I'm enough. The medals will equate to being
Yeah.
enough.
Mhm.
Even just like it's something simple, Charisse, but like even as a young girl, I always thought that if I'm going to someone's house, if I get invited for dinner or whatever, that I always need to bring something. I mean, that is in my Italian culture anyhow, but just when people would just show up and they were just good being them and just showing up as them as their company, that was enough. I never understood that concept. And so as I got older, I think it was just stepping into the realm of like just me being me and showing up to be there for a friend. That's enough. I don't need to bring something to externalize that my existence is enough type of thing. So I would say in figure skating, it started off definitely being as a people pleasing mechanism for me to externalize that worthiness. But through and through, Charisse, like the winning might have been for my mom and dad, but I loved being on the ice. Like, I mean, you could definitely see through my performances, I dedicated a lot of them actually to my brother. I think that was my way of healing and kind of figuring out who I was. It was a way to express myself. So even though it started off, you know, in that way of pleasing, I think that there was a lot of true joy that derived from it. But after the time that I stepped into this new world of realization around 19, by that time I had already, finished off my competitive dancing career. Piano, I had, done my levels that I was expected to do. Same with swimming. It was more with figure skating that I continued that on. It's just that the performances felt different. I wasn't going there being like, I hope that they're happy with that performance. It was I happy with that performance? And I actually, one of the things I used to do is when I would get off the ice, the first thing I would do is I would rush to my mom to see her eye contact and what kind of body language she was giving to give an idea of whether or not I was successful in her eyes. And I stopped doing that. I was like, it really doesn't matter actually what she thinks. I was really proud of that performance. And there were times where she thought I could have done better, but it didn't affect me the same way because I was really proud of the way that I skated. And that's all that had to matter at the end of the day. So I think that's definitely where it shifted.
I love that. I love that you recognize that. And a lot of people, I mean, you're only 19. So I'm going to shift it a different way, though, probably that you're not expecting. Because as a mom, I have 6 children, and I have
Amazing.
always, I've always put that pressure on myself growing up, kind of like you. And there are reasons which, I didn't realize until I was much older. Probably through my first divorce, to be honest with you. And so that was not until I was in my 30s, actually. And so because of that, like I actually have realized that I put a lot of pressure on my kids because I do have a few special needs kids, and I do have some children who suffer with some mental disorders, genetic, and so I never had to deal with that growing up. It was foreign to me. I'm like, you just get out of bed, you go do what you need to, like I don't get it. And like I have a child right now that it's been very difficult to get him to just a couple more weeks and he'll be graduating, right? And he's in a place where I don't even think he realizes what's going on. And so I find myself losing my patience with him. And then I found there's an age in my world from 9 to 10 years old. And I remember my 11, well, soon to be 11, she's like, Mom, something's going on in my brain. I don't understand it. Like, I just don't feel the same. And, how do you explain to a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old kid that those are hormones, your body's changing, and that's why you feel different. But she was very in tune with her body. And so because of that, but she was probably one of my most difficult, because one minute she's happy, the next minute you say something, she's on the floor, literally spread eagle, like bawling like a baby. I'm like, what the heck? And it wasn't until you said that you were doing things for your parents, that because I have another one that she just turned 9. And so she's in that stage. Well, before that, like, she's like, Mom, what's wrong with her? And I'm like, she's cuckoo. So I would say to, her name's Melinda. I'd say, Melinda, you're my only hope. Like, all your other siblings have gone through this crazy time. You're my only hope. And I didn't realize until you said that, the pressure that I'm putting on her. Because as she starts to have her emotions, which she needs to have and feel that, I'd be like, oh, you're my only hope. And she'd instantly stop. And so now I'm like, oh my gosh, luckily she just turned 9. So we have time to undo what I've done to her, But I appreciate your story and coming on, because I think we as parents, we don't realize that, that issue, and this same little one, she was born to the day, and I didn't even realize this. Literally to the day I was in the hospital and they make you fill out all this paperwork. I had had a miscarriage of a boy, literally to the day a year before. So she was born on March 9th. I had lost him on March 9th of the year before. Didn't even realize that. And so for me, like, the emotions that we go through as parents, and sorry, my dog is crazy. The emotions we go through as parents and the pressures that we put on our kids, we have no clue. Like, when you grow up, you're like, I'm never going to do that when I'm a parent. And you're like, shoot, I'm worse, And so, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, thank you for sharing that, Chris. That's so beautiful. I think too, it's almost like this permission for ourselves as parents and for our children, that like when we do have those moments, we get frustrated, to say to them, like, we're human too.
Yeah.
Like, we all have these moments and we can work through them together. And you get frustrated, I get frustrated too. I mean, I think that you're an incredible mom. The fact that you can see all of that so clearly, Charisse, like, I mean, I think your kids are so lucky to have you. We're human, right? We're not always going to get things right. We're going to get frustrated sometimes, or we're, get overwhelmed. But I think that's beautiful that, every time that you have those moments, it gives them the permission to do so themselves, right? Because the expectation for us to always have it together, it's never going to happen. So I think it's beautiful that your kids feel so safe and secure to be able to express those emotions.
No, I agree. And even when I totally lost it with my son, like, I disappointed myself. And I went to him, I'd probably gone to him 5 times. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I let my brain like take control of what I chose to say or do. And I'm really sorry. I love you so much. And I think sometimes as parents, like, I've known parents where they are not going to admit that they have a mistake. They're not going to show weakness to their kids. And to me, I just feel like that's not a good relationship, because if you want them to be vulnerable with you, this dog, if you want them to be vulnerable with you, then you need to be vulnerable with them.
Absolutely. Of course.
So thank you for sharing that. I want to switch gears now and talk about, you're a speaker, you've been on several stages, and you're an author. So talk to me about your book.
Absolutely, Charisse. Well, I have one. Actually, I was sharing this with you before the recording, that I have one of the books that hasn't been published just yet, and it's called The Unbreakable Smile. So it's kind of like the adult version of the children's book that I just wrote, about grief, loss, resilience, gratitude, and really just, I think from my perspective of, a child kind of growing up in an environment where there's a lot of grief, there's just that overhanging of that sadness in a home, and not really understanding from a young child as to like what was going on, how I can find my place. And so a lot of the book is kind of from my perspective as a child growing up in that environment, and then from my observation of like everything that my mom and dad went through, how my family's perspective of it all was. And I guess also too a little bit of my perspective, or through my lens of like what it must have been like for, say, my sister or some of my cousins or extended family to, my mom and dad. Like I have a 20-year gap with my sister, right? So I just turned 30, and with her being 20 years older than me, I just, even that
Wow.
newfound awareness of like what it must have been like for all of these cousins that grew up with my sister and my brother. That was the norm. All of a sudden he passes, and then there's this random child born, and now she's trying to fit in and become like part of the family, what it must have been like for them. So a lot of that book is kind of like the adult perspective, whereas the children's book that I'm in the process of, we're in the pre-order stage, and then it'll be available on Amazon and all the things pretty soon. Here it's called After Loss Came You, and essentially that's the children's version of, essentially I wanted to give a tool for parents that have, whether they've had a miscarriage, a stillborn, or losing a child in an accident such as my mom and dad did, having a tool that they can read to their little one about that there was another sibling that is up there watching over them, or whatever they want to kind of illustrate that in a really beautiful way, but also just for that reminder to that young child that they're not here to fill a void, they're not here to be anything other than them. And kind of that message of that young girl Becca saying you don't need to be Francesco and Francesca, but being you is enough. That was something I didn't get to understand or know till I was 19. I really wish that when I was like 4 years old, that would have been ingrained in me. So that way I knew that it didn't matter what I was going through in my life, or exactly if I was having a bad day, that didn't equate to me not being enough or my worthiness being at stake. But that I could also be a child in that moment, right? I think a large portion of my younger years, which I don't regret at all, but I do feel like a lot of those younger years, I was expected, or at least I thought I was expected to be way older and way more mature and have it together more than any of my peers in my class. I wouldn't change it for the world, but at the same time, there are moments where I hear young kids talk about some of the play dates they used to have and some of the games they used to play, and I'm like, oh, like I don't remember doing any of that stuff. I remember, in grade 3, my teacher was like, Francesca, all the kids are out at recess. Like, what are you doing in here? And I was like, well, my parents are grieving right now. I'm just going to write them a card and a
Oh
poem
my
because
gosh.
this is really, really going to help them get through this today. And she always used to look at me and be like, how old are you again? And I'd be like, Miss Hazel, I'm 8. Why do you keep asking me? Of course, now I know she was, depicting of the fact that I was a bit of an old soul, but
Mhm.
um, I would love to go back in time and be able to say to that little Francesca, like, go outside and play, because I didn't have a lot of those moments. And it's okay. It's just, I really wanted that children's book to be an avenue where if there is a young one that is grappling with the fact that they are needing to do way more and think way more about how they can help their family at 8 years old. Like, I just want to be able to go and give them a hug through that book and be like, you just need to go outside, play, go on the swing, and don't think about that right now because it's not your responsibility, even if they think it is, right? So that's I'm sorry to get emotional, but
Be emotional. We can't. Oh.
yeah.
And I think, that's the part that your parents love you so much and they didn't realize, and so first of all, kudos to them that they're still together, right? Because usually losing a child can either push them apart or bring them together. So the fact that they're together, but you know, what am I trying to say? Sometimes we aren't ready or we don't know what we're doing to our children because they were still grieving, and so you missed the people that they were when their first children. Like so I had 4 kids with my first husband and I had 2 with my second husband, and let me tell you, children when you're older is like your energy is not the same, and you're like, I'm way heavier than I was, and I'm not like, I'm tired, right? And so like I love my daughters dearly, and I would never change but I feel like they have absolutely had a different mom than my first four, and that's not fair, right? And so because of that, I've made this conscious effort where when they come home from school, like I'm right there. And like yesterday, my daughter, she learned how to do weaving, right? And so she comes home and she takes a box and she cuts it up and she makes this whole thing and she's weaving. I should go get the picture. It's amazing what she's doing. And then her sister's like, well, I want one. So then she's like, Mom, can we wake up at 7 o'clock this morning so that we can work on our weaving? And then
Oh, how sweet.
but it's like I got to help cut the box and I got to help do these other things. And so normally it's like, oh, they're home, but I'm going to stay in my office and keep working. And so it's like, no, like they need a mom. And so it's, as moms, we get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff. It's hard. And the fact that you have that message with the adult version and the child version, oh my gosh, it is just amazing. And I think that we need to do a better job as parents to remember that our kids are kids and they don't, like, I remember my dad young, and I don't like to share some of this stuff because I don't want like my dad to feel bad, or I don't want my sisters to feel bad. But my dad would come into my room and like crying, sobbing, and just like, please don't turn out like your sisters. And I'm like, I won't. I will be the perfect child, you know? And so for the longest time, like my siblings, my aunt, she'd call them, oh, you're Miss Perfect. And it's like, well, because I can't hurt my parents. And again, my dad didn't mean anything by that at all. And we have a good relationship. And my sisters are not, they were not horrible, you know, at all. And so, and I love them dearly, and they're very successful in their lives and everything's great. But those little like memories that we have, and that's why the book that I have coming out, Flipping the Iceberg, those are the trauma points that you got to get through before you can get into a relationship, because if you don't, you're going to struggle in your relationship.
Absolutely. I can't wait to read that, Charisse. When does that come out?
Oh, next week, actually. So
okay.
I know.
So exciting. Okay, please send me the link.
Yes.
That's incredible. But it's powerful, right? Like I don't think we realize how powerful our words are, but at the same time, like I think as parents, just giving ourselves the grace at the same time, because yes, my mom's not the same person she was when she raised my brother and sister. Obviously, she was, it was 20 years prior, but on the same token, do I think that there were so many incredible qualities and attributes that she brought to the table all those years later? Yeah. I mean, I feel like the wisdom, the insight, and everything that she was able to bring to the table, even through her grief, to the way that she raised me. I definitely have so much gratitude for that as well, even though maybe it looked a little different. Maybe there was a little bit less fun and, goofiness, maybe that my sister and brother got to experience, but she definitely brought a depth of wisdom and knowledge that I know that you're bringing to your children all these years later, that, I mean, you now get to instill in them in a whole new, beautiful way. So I think that there's definitely a benefit both ways.
No, I totally agree. And I do have more knowledge and I do have more money, actually, and so it's a different world. Like we were on food stamps when the first were a couple of years, and because that's a whole nother story, but and it wasn't a long time. It was a very short time, but it was, my son is graduating for several years. He'd be like, Mom, I don't want you. No, I don't know. Because he was afraid to spend money. I'm like, hey, let's go out to eat. No, it's okay. And I didn't realize until finally he's like, no, I don't want you to have to spend money, and now that's clearly not an issue, but
what a beautiful journey though, right?
Yeah.
And then getting to see that, evolution, like how incredible.
No, it's been great. Okay, so speaking, tell me kind of what your message is when you go speak.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, Charisse, it'll be that, okay, actually, if I may, I'll share kind of how it started. I had the courage this one day to post on Instagram. I didn't really have a big Instagram following back then. I maybe had like 700 followers. This is in 2019. And I just thought to myself, you know what, if I can start sharing a little bit about my message. I also got a divorce really young. I got married at like, oh gosh, I would have been like around 20 years old. So I would have gotten divorced around 21, 22. And in the midst of that, again, that was a little bit of like, this is what the rest of the Italian families do, and this is what I should be doing.
Yep.
And I realized, this is not my path or my journey. Wonderful human. We just were not meant to be together. But in the midst of that, so I guess it would have been after my divorce, I thought to myself, you know what? I want to start sharing little bits and pieces about my brother's passing, about the divorce. And maybe there's one person out there that needed to hear this message. And I remember when I made my first post, and it was all centered around gratitude. There was no,
Mhm.
speaking ill about anybody. I have no room for that. I remember I got a call from my folks and they were like, oh my gosh, like that's really vulnerable for you to share all of that on social media. And it was really taboo back then to share
Yeah.
that much, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, well, but maybe there's somebody out there that needs to hear this. And there were. People started reaching out. They're like, Francesca, I needed this today. Thank you. I didn't know that you felt this way. But what's interesting, Charisse, is that this one day I made a post. It was a little bit about my brother's passing, a little bit about the divorce, just little lessons, all centered in gratitude. I get this call from the University of British Columbia. It's a university that's quite popular in Canada where I live. And anyways, in the midst of this, I get a call from this university. It was a faculty member, and they're like, "Hi, Francesca, we just read your post that you just made." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Like, thank you so much." And they're like, "We're doing this panel, like this, essentially like a speaking event, and it's called the Gratitude Project, and we really want you to be one of our speakers." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind." I'm like, "I'm not a speaker. I will not be doing that, but thank you so much." They're like, "No, we'd like to meet you. We think this is a perfect fit." I'm like, again, I will disappoint you. I am not a speaker. Long story short, we met up. And I was like, how did you feel the need to call me just after reading one post? They're like, well, we were moved to tears. Like there was something so powerful about what you said. We just felt it was the right fit for our talk. And I was just kind of blown away by that. I was like, okay, I have to kind of trust this. But in the midst of this, Charisse, we're sitting there and I'm like, may I ask what other speakers are going to be at your event? And they're like, well, we have this TEDx speaker named Mike, and they talked about his story. And I'm like, oh, geez. And then there's this other gentleman. I don't know if you know him. His name's Joshua Dewick. He was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and he also was a Paralympic gold medalist. Incredible human. He's one of the speakers, and this other lady named Lindsay, who has spoken for a whole bunch of different events. And I'm looking at them, and I'm like, with all due respect, do you see what's missing here? Like, I am not meant to be in this panel. Like, what qualifies me? They're like, your story is powerful. You need to share it. So I was like, okay, I will speak, but don't tell me I didn't tell you so. So I get to this event, Charisse, and it's this massive venue, and I have all of these incredible TEDx speakers on the stage, and this guy that was on Ellen, and I get up there, and Charisse, I kid you not, within like a minute of my speech, everybody starts to cry, and I'm like, oh, okay, like people are really moved by what I have to say. And so that was one of the most interesting experiences for me because it was in the midst of me feeling the courage to share my story on something as simple as a post on social media prompted that call. And in the midst of me being on this stage, it occurred to me very, very quickly being up there and the microphone in my hand. I was like, I feel at home up here. I mean, most people, one of the biggest fears in today's society is public speaking. And yet I was up on this stage and I was like, I'm home.
Yeah.
Like there's something about being up here that feels like I'm meant to do this. And so as the years carried on, I just started getting more and more calls of, hi, Francesca, I want you to be my speaker on resilience and gratitude. Hi, Francesca, we want you to talk about your brother's passing and what you learned through that. Talk about your divorce and about gratitude. And it just started to happen more and more. And as time went on, I was like, oh my gosh, like maybe this is just supposed to be a part of my journey. And so I was in development real estate for quite some time, about 10 years. And then it was just in, I guess, last year that I decided that I would fully step away from that and step fully into speaking and coaching. So it's not that I've been doing speaking obviously for a couple of years now, but at the same time now it's just kind of like I knew that this is where I'm meant to fully step into. And it's beautiful because I mean it's one of those things, right? And I'm sure you feel this too, Charisse, that when you're doing what you love in life, you don't feel like you're working. You step into this arena of just, oh my gosh, I know I'm meant to be here. And there's just that peace in your heart when those moments happen. So yeah, I feel very grateful. But that would definitely be a lot of the talks that I end up speaking, the topics that I end up speaking on.
I love that. That is fantastic.
Thank
And
you.
I think that that's, when you're your authentic self, things start to come that you need and that you want. So I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
Well, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they find you?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn as Francesca Amante. I'm on YouTube as Francesca Amante, but my most active platform would definitely be Instagram. And I'm also on Facebook. But on Instagram, I've abbreviated my name just slightly. So it's Fresca, so Fresca Amante, Amante. So if you add me on there, and then you'll see the full name Francesca Amante pop up. But from there in my bio, you have a link to all the different things that I'm doing, whether it's my book or whether it's my women's conferences or some of my talks. Literally everything is in that bio. So I would welcome anyone to reach out to me. I'm here anytime. And I can tell Charisse that the incredible human beings that exist in your orbit are people that I would be so incredibly honored to know in any capacity. So, and I'm just excited to get to know you more, Charisse. I feel like I'm on here to a friend that I've known for years. So pretty cool how that aligns in life.
I agree. Absolutely. I feel the same way. Okay, so last question. What have I not asked you that you want to make sure that we end this podcast with people knowing, whether it be personal, professional, business, relationship, I don't care. What would your parting advice?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely love that you touched on in our pre-interview was talking about if you were sitting on a park bench and you were to look at your 19-year-old self, what would you tell that particular human being? And it's interesting. I just think that anyone in the audience today that was listening to this podcast, whether you're a mom or you're just someone that is really trying to figure out who you are authentically without the pre-scripting of anybody else or what the world is telling you to be, I would just say a reminder that, and I know it sounds cheesy, but it's the words that freed me in my life. Just remember that when you wake up in the morning, being you, everything that you are, the person that you were before the world told you what you needed to be, that's the person that is going to make the most impact in this life. And I think that there's so much of, I think especially in the world of social media, we're always trying to do what the newest trend is. I think that we forget at the end of the day that our authentic selves is one of the most beautiful gifts that we can give the world. No one else can be us. That's the beautiful superpower. Nobody else is Charisse. The way that you show up in this world and the way that I show up in this world, nobody can be us. And so all we have to do is be that one person that nobody else can be, and and beautiful things happen. You never know what one person may be impacted by us for the better today just by showing up.
I 100% agree with you. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. And Unbreakable Mompreneurs, I hope that you've listened to something that has resonated. For me, it was definitely making sure that we listen to who we are and that we don't have to live for somebody else. You live for yourself. Be authentic. So have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Francesca, for being on.
Thank you so much, Charisse.
Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.